Welcome back to Opening Up Classical Studies here at the Student Hub Live at the Open University. This session focuses on the Votives project. So we're going to take a look at Greek and Roman votive offerings, which are objects that were left in sanctuaries for the gods, often in thanks or hope for their divine help. And I'm joined by Emma Jane Graham and Jessica Hughes, both of whom conduct research into ancient votive offerings. And together they coordinate the Votives project, which you can find out more about by visiting the website thevotivesproject.org. And in this session, they're going to explain some of the background to this incredibly important aspect of ancient religion. So what are votives?
Well, we've brought some along to show you. Votives, when we say votives, we generally mean objects that have been left in sacred spaces, so churches, temples, sanctuaries, and they're given by people often in hope for a miracle or in thanks for one that's been received. These ones that we've got today aren't ancient. These come from southern Italy, from Catholic churches. They're ones that we've collected on various trips around Europe. There's also a Japanese one here. You can see that votives come in all different shapes and sizes and materials and different kind of symbols. We've even got a wax ear that was from Portugal, from the Catholic site of Fatima. So you get an idea of the kind of things that are being represented, body parts, but it can also be figurines or candles or flowers, all different kinds of objects. And every one of these things has got a story behind them, haven't they?
And did people in classical antiquity dedicate votives too?
They did, and in fact they dedicated similar things to the sorts of things that Jess has just been showing you. We've got some examples that you can see on the board here. This is totally a random selection of things. So you can see body parts like Jess has just been pointing out. But one of the things to take from this, I think, is the fact that they also come in all sorts of different types of material. So this little miniature arm, which is only about that sort of size, is made from copper alloy or bronze. Then we've got terracotta things. These two here, this lady with a baby, were probably made in mould, so the clay pressed in. And then we've got this one here, which is made from stone, possibly marble, and is carved in relief. So we've got things that are in the round as objects, but also things that sort of show pictures of people actually giving offerings. Here he's giving a giant leg.
Wow. So do we know then why people dedicated these, and what do we know about like the stories behind some of them?
Well, we can never know exactly why any single person dedicated a votive offering. We can have a broad guess, can't we, at some of the kinds of things. So, for instance, health, I think, was a very common concern in ancient society as it is in our own. And a lot of the body parts are generally assumed, aren't they, to have been dedicated for health reasons?
Yes, for health reasons. So it has been assumed, for example, that the man here with his giant leg has got a problem with his leg. It's also interesting that right next to it are two little models of feet. So somebody else has also come along. You can just see those in here.
And he's got a varicose vein
he's
running
got possibly
down.
A varicose vein. So that's the possible reason for why he's gone to the god and said, "My leg is painful. Can you heal me?"
Yes, but then also early infancy and childbearing. We seem to have lots of votives that were related to that kind of thing. So perhaps the breastfeeding mother, that might be for an issue around that. Yes, and then EJ, you brought one along, didn't you? That
I did. This is a model of a...
Can I hold that up
you
for
can,
people to
yes.
see at home?
That's a modern replica of, believe it or not, a uterus or a womb. It doesn't really look like one. It looks a bit more like a sack. But we find those in hundreds and sometimes thousands at sites in Italy. And they're usually assumed to be connected with women who are struggling to have children or just would like to have children, going to the gods and asking for their assistance. They do look a bit weird. I'll accept that.
But not many of the votives have inscriptions on them. In fact, in anatomical ones from Italy, there are only about 5, aren't there, with inscriptions on. So we don't really get the dedicants explaining in their own words the stories behind their gift to the god. So there is a lot of guesswork involved.
Yeah, so you're speculating then about a lot of this. How does that then stand up in terms of academic rigour?
Well, OK, it's important to say that we do have textual evidence, don't we, for votive offerings? So we've got stories in most of our Greek and Roman literary texts. They're so common, votive offerings. There are hundreds and thousands of the actual things, but then we do hear about them in literary records. So we've got poems which describe people, say, giving hair and clothes, maybe when they're adolescents or when they retire or when they have children. So we know that some of the reasons that people generally did dedicate votives, so it's not complete guesswork, work. And we also have some inscriptions from ancient Greece, don't we, that we can look at, like ones from the site of Epidaurus.
Let's take a look at that.
Yeah. There we are. And I know that some of our studio audience have actually been to Epidaurus quite recently. That's right, isn't it? So maybe you could even have a go at identifying some of the structures on this plan. Yeah. Yeah, so go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, Epidaurus is a site. It started off with a small temple to Apollo, and then it grew into this great sanctuary associated with the healing god Asklepios, who was the son of Apollo. And there people would go and they might spend a night in a special room known as the Abaton, where they would go to sleep and hope that the deity would come to them in their dreams. And this, in fact, here is a modern model of Asklepios. You can tell it's Asklepios partly because he has a beard, but also because he has a snake around his staff. And so he was the god of healing who was believed to reside at Epidaurus. And you might do other things whilst you're at Epidaurus. There's a theatre. We've been talking about Greek theatre. There's a stadium. So it's a big sanctuary, but one of its main aims was seems to have been for people to go and get divine.
Yes, and actually a really fascinating piece of evidence for votives comes from Epidaurus, and that's a series of stone stelae which have stories written on them, and they're stories that were told by people who came to the sanctuary in the hope of healing, and they slept there, they had a healing miracle, they experienced something like that, and they told their sometimes like quite eccentric stories. They were written down on these stelae, and we can read them today, and actually we brought along a selection to tell you.
But not of stone ones, I
Not
hope.
stone ones, no, these are kind of homemade scrolls. So I don't know, Karen, if you might like to even choose one?
Thank you.
Okay.
Let's see what this one says. Would you like to read it out?
Yeah, sure.
Oh.
Yeah, no, you read that one.
I'll read it out. Okay. Right. Ambrosia from Athens, blind in one eye, came as suppliant to the god. Walking around the sanctuary, she ridiculed some of the cures as being unlikely and impossible. So that tells us that she's going around reading these same stories that she's now writing. Yeah. Sleeping here, she saw a vision of the god who came to her and said he would make her well, but she would have to pay a fee by dedicating a silver pig in the sanctuary as a memorial of her ignorance. When he had said those things, he cut her sick eye and poured a medicine into it, and when day came, she left well.
Yeah. So something that's very interesting about this story is that if, as archaeologists, we were to find the offering that Ambrosia left, which was a silver pig, there's no way that we could come up with that backstory to it. We'd say, well, maybe it was somebody commemorating a sacrifice or someone who had a sick pig. But there is no way we'd say, well, actually, it was her eye that was poorly and Asklepios told her to dedicate the pig because she hadn't believed the other miracles. Yeah. So that's a really good warning in a way, isn't it? That we can't guess at the obvious story all the time. There are probably all different kinds of narratives behind these things.
Especially because we do also find, here's another model of models of eyes. Yeah. So we might sort of be tempted to associate these with this type of story, but there's so much more information in there.
So you're finding that the scripts and things like the terracotta eye, which is a model of one of the votives that you might have found.
Yes, I mean, that one is from, it's a replica of one from an Italic context, and we don't get this kind of inscription, unfortunately, in Italy, but they are the same broad concerns about healing, and, votives were found all over the ancient world, weren't they? So France, even in Britain, we've got some from Roman Britain, but from Egypt and Gaul, all over the place. So it's a very, very rich source of evidence. But do you want to read another story?
Yeah. Right. Let's grab this one here.
Yeah.
You did that so well.
Shall I read again?
Yeah. I love the way these are written so beautifully.
Oh, yeah. I did that yesterday in front of the television.
Okay. Pandarus, a Thessalian, had marks on his forehead. He saw a vision as he slept. So that's, again, him sleeping in the Abaton. It seemed to him that the god bound the marks with a headband and then told him to remove the band when he left the sleeping area and dedicate it as an offering to the temple. When day came, he got up and took off the band and saw his face free of marks, and he dedicated to the temple the band with the signs which had been on his forehead. So there's an example, again, of something that we might not actually find in the archaeological record. If you read that story that he actually took the band off the bandage and left it in the sanctuary, that's not going to survive 2,500 1,000 years. So we have the story, but we don't actually have the object that goes with it.
If I may, I'll just show you the cover to, this is, we've brought along our books that we've written about votives, but this is a kind of example of a possible multimedia type of offering. So it's got a terracotta votive hand on, which is from an Etrusco Italic sanctuary, and it's got a bandage tied around it. Now that's the museum that's put the bandage on, but I think it's a really effective image. And we also have to think that we just find the raw terracotta objects, don't we? But they could have been decorated, they could have been painted, they could have had soft fabrics that now haven't stood the test of time. So we really do have to leave our imaginations free, don't we?
We do, and there are some stories as well in some of the written texts that talk about people going to sanctuaries and leaving foodstuffs, in particular cakes. So people might make these little cakes, bring special cakes to the gods, and obviously those are not going to survive either. So we're making it sound like there's an awful lot we don't know, but I think that's why we like votives, isn't it? We can start to speculate.
Don't mention cake at this time of day, or set everybody off in the chat. But do we have any votives surviving from Epidaurus or not?
Not very many from the period that we're talking about, which is the 4th century BC. So we don't have any of the things that are described in the Yamata, the miracle inscriptions. But we do have a lot of votives from elsewhere in ancient Greece. So including, there's a sculpted relief from, is it Oropos, with the healing of the shoulder.
So let's take a look at this slide here, and we'll see one of the Greek votive reliefs, which is showing a man being healed.
Yeah. Yeah, so
tell us about this.
Well, there are many examples like this from throughout classical Greece. And in a way, you might have seen images that look a bit like this, but are actually grave stele. This one is from another healing site where the ritual of, we say, incubation, where people slept in the sanctuary, was practiced. And it shows one story, but in 2 little kind of comic strip boxes in a way. So one, the patient is sleeping, and in the next one, he's seeing this vision of the god who is healing his shoulder. And I don't know if you can see that there's a pair of eyes up the top, which might symbolise the vision that he had during his sleep. So then it's a very complex iconographic representation, and it does tell us a little bit about the story, the experience that the person had at the sanctuary, but there are still an awful lot of details that we don't know. So, but we do have a lot of votives from Italy, and we've brought some more along, haven't we, to show you. It was really difficult to choose because there were so many to pick from. These are all anatomical votives. They show, for instance, somebody with a gaping hole in their tummy, and that might be for some kind of intestinal illness, or something to do with the symbolism of sacrifice, perhaps. Well, you might like to have a go at guessing what some of these are about. What about, I mean, the eye is an easy one to start off with, perhaps.
Blindness, would it might be?
It could be, yeah.
It could be for blindness, absolutely. That's what's usually associated with eyes. Other people have suggested that it's perhaps to have your eyes opened to the god. So it may be that you've had this deep religious experience and you've suddenly had your eyes open to some mystery that you didn't know before.
Or you need laser eye treatment.
Or you need laser eye treatment. Absolutely, absolutely. I don't think that was on offer in an Italian sanctuary, unfortunately.
But like the foot, you know, at first glance, that might be a kind of foot or toe problem, but it could also symbolise a journey. You know, that would be a sort of tailor-made offering that you could go and pick and then repurpose for something that's not health. If you were going on a long journey or wanted to symbolise your arrival at a sanctuary after a pilgrimage, that would also be a feasible thing to use the offering for. And what about these ones?
They look like strange objects. What are they? They look like sea urchins or something.
Anyone in the audience want to have a guess?
Brains. You're not far off.
Not far off,
brains,
actually. Yeah.
They seem to be scalps, or basically hair. So if you think about particularly classical sculptures and things where you'll see people with, you know, these curly hair, these exactly that, basically taken off the head. And there is, in fact, a story from Epidaurus, from one of the stelae, which is on one of our mystery scrolls somewhere. I think it might be.
I think it's
that
the green one. Do you want to show you? You have a look at that.
I know. Right. Ah, yes. Okay. This relates. So this is this man had no hair on his head but plenty on his chin, and we've seen some great beards actually. Ashamed because he was laughed at by the others, he slept here. the god anointed his head with a drug and made it have hair.
Yeah. So there you go.
I mean, that's one of the things I love about studying votives. You get to real people with real concerns that are real problems.
Yeah.
I mean, that may not be a real problem, but it's a problem that some people might understand today. I think there's that real connection between past and present. Yes. That, you know, we all have bodies and they all stop working, whether it's they really stop working or whether you've just gone bald. And that's that nice connection.
And so just to go back to these terracotta scalps, because they could be for baldness, but we do also know that people dedicated real hair offerings. Sometimes at kind of liminal transitional moments in life, like when you become a citizen when you're little, or when you're an adolescent or you get married. And in fact, that is a parallel with modern Catholic practice today, because some of these sanctuaries in southern Italy that you go around, you will see plaits of real hair, and it's sometimes after the little girl's done her first Holy Communion, or maybe because I read one story and there's a plait of hair where they were saved from an earthquake. The whole village was saved, so this little girl then decided to cut her plait of hair off. And we get lots of textual sources from Greece and Rome about people offering either their first look of hair or their plait or something like that.
Yeah, Pausanias talks about, I think, is it statue of Artemis, that is, you can hardly see the statue because it's just draped in hair that has been dedicated.
Yes. And one maybe final thing about this is the colour on it. So you can see there's the white and the black paint. We mentioned the paint earlier, and it is very, very rare to find the paint on these votive offerings, but this is possibly one form of evidence for the personalisation or individualisation of votive offerings, that yes, these things are mould-made. They all do look pretty much the same, but perhaps you could go to the store where you bought the votives and then, you know, either scratch your name in or paint something or paint a little picture or something like that. Exactly, make it more of your own. Yeah.
Wow. I know there's a lot of discussion with our remote audience, HJ.
Yes, well, we have decided if cake is left out somewhere, it's not going to stay there long, especially around here. But Susan Davis has a fantastic question. She says, I think it's interesting that this seems to be still go on in Greece today. I've seen lots of tin body part votives in Greek Orthodox churches, and she's seen people leave offerings at ancient Greek sanctuaries. And she wants to know why you think this still endures.
Good question.
That's a good question, Jess.
Yeah. Yes, I've seen those ones in modern Greece as well. The tamata, the little, they're very similar to this, but somehow in Greece they seem to be a little bit smaller. But I think it's just a very kind of easy and natural way of communicating with something that you can't see. I don't really want to say it's kind of a universal impulse, because the minute you call something universal, then there's always exceptions and reasons why people don't do that. But I think it's partly tradition, so maybe generations and generations and generations have done that. But also, I mean, I'm sure people here today as well have also kind of had the urge when you see a wishing well with a coin to put one in yourself, even if you don't know quite why you're doing it, or put in a flower. In the Roman Forum, there are people who leave flowers, aren't there, at the site of Julius Caesar's assassination. And it's not necessarily that you have your own religious conviction about why you're doing it, but it's just almost a ritual that you feel will connect you to both generations gone past and other people, whether that's a faith community or just people, tourists who've gone in line in front of you. So it is a difficult question, a good question. Yeah.
Perhaps something again about the physical presence of something when things are so out of your control as well. Having that aspect there could make you perhaps embody it in a certain way. Or maybe because it works, as is clearly the case. Shall we have time for one more?
Another scroll.
One more.
Go on, you pick one.
Okay. Closest first. Right. Let's see who this is. Oh, a man's toe was healed by a snake. Oh, this is slightly far-fetched, isn't it? He was in terrible condition from a malignant ulceration on this toe. During the day, he was carried out of the temple by servants and was sitting on a seat. He fell asleep there, and then a snake came out of the temple and healed the toe with his tongue. Oh. When it had done this, it went back into the temple again. When the man woke up, he was well, and said he had seen a vision. It seemed to him that a good-looking young man had sprinkled a drug over his toe.
Well, that's quite interesting, because that brings us back to Asklepios here with the snake around his staff, because I think what that story is telling us is that he's understanding that the snake has acted as a kind of extension of Asklepios and has come in and by biting him, he's brought the divine powers into him. But at the same time, you've also got that mix of a medical world going on, and the fact that there's some of the other ones we've talked about have mentioned medicine or even sort of divine surgery. So you've got this blending, that was quite a nice one, this blending of ways of thinking about your body and of healing it. So there's the sort of slightly more medical and the sort of mystical, divine that sort of mix together. And without that being an issue, we might see it as an issue, more of an issue today. But the ancients, you know, try a bit of everything.
And Asklepios is often embodied in the form of a snake. So you get, when new sanctuaries to Asklepios are founded, the foundation story, a bit like on the Tiber Island, is that a snake slithered there and made his home there, and then that becomes the sanctuary of Asklepios. So that is quite common in a way, to find that mixture of Asklepios and the snake, and the snake itself playing a role in healing.
Well, that's been amazing. We've seen some wonderful sources here. What would you say is our sort of take-home point about the relevance of votives and why they matter?
I think they matter because, for me anyway, they give me a way of, as I said before, thinking about the ordinary people of the ancient world. Every single votive that was dedicated was dedicated by an individual. Whatever issues they were having, whether they were just asking for good fortune, whether they were ill, whether they were hoping for a baby, they all have these stories behind them. And I think, for me, that's a way of understanding ancient people as real people, people who are not so different from us, even though they might react in slightly different ways to life situations. A kind of just a way of humanising the past, really. So not big political history and great battles and great rulers, but actually, you know, ordinary men and women and children.
Well, there have been so many stories, and each one of them is unique, but it's been wonderful to see such a lovely range of them. Thank you so much, Emma Jane and Jess. You can find out more about the Votives project, and the links to that and so much more are available on the Student Hub Live website. That's studenthubליve.open.ac.uk. And we're going to be back after Hilary Hodgson is going to tell us a bit about the work with the charity Classics for All. And then we're going to show you one of our animated versions of the Odyssey, which is Troy Story 2. That's not Toy Story 2, but Troy Story 2. So join me for a couple of minutes after this break.